This happened not too long ago. Several weeks back, I went to Chick-fil-A one night. I was going there to pick up some food and bring it back home. It was a little bit later because I had just recently gotten off of work. So I parked my car in the parking lot of Chick-fil-A and started to walk to the building. Even though it was a little bit later, I was still surprised at how quiet things seemed. Chick-fil-A usually seems to be busy almost right up until the time they close. So as I was making my way to the front doors, I noticed an employee standing right next to them. It was a man who was young looking, maybe in his 20s. He was skinny and had dark hair, but was wearing a Chick-fil-A hat, as well as the rest of the uniform. As I approached the door, he then stood in front of it and said, "Excuse me," to me. I stopped and looked at the man and asked him what he wanted. He said that he really needed a ride and was wondering if I could give him one. I was very confused by this request. I said no, I could not give him a ride. The man did not say anything and just kept standing there. I had to walk around him to go inside of the building. When I had made it inside, I heard the man starting to walk in after me. But then he just kind of stood near the front doors of the building while I walked over to the counter. I ordered the food that I wanted, but as I was doing so, the employee at the counter told me something. She pointed over to the man who had asked me for a ride. He was still standing by the door. She said that he didn't work here, but had been hanging out around the place for hours and talking to customers. She said she wanted to let me know. I was also told that they thought he had left. I remember that as we were looking over at him, the man then walked back over to the doors and left the building. This was strange, and I didn't really know what to make of it. After ordering, I waited around for a short time before the food was done. Then I took it and walked out to leave. After making it out of the building and into the quiet parking lot, I headed for my car. But I soon realized that the same man was standing around right outside of my vehicle. I stopped about 10 feet away from it as the man stood in front of my driver's door. He once again asked me for a ride. The guy seemed really sketchy, to say the least. There was no way that I was going to be giving him a ride anywhere. I said no again, but he didn't move from my car. I really didn't know what else to do in the moment, so I started walking back to the Chick-fil-A. I went back inside of it and then into the lobby. But just moments after I got inside, I heard the door opening. I looked back and saw the man was going in. He started to walk over to me, and the restaurant was basically just us two. The employee at the counter told the man that he needed to leave. I remember at that point, he shouted a couple of curse words at the employee, but then he actually did turn and leave the building. It was very strange. I waited inside of the restaurant for about a minute before walking over to the window. I wanted to see if the guy was at my car again. When I walked over and looked, I noticed that he was in fact at my car. He was kind of standing around near the driver's door again. I watched him try to open my driver's door, but thankfully my car was locked. After trying my back door as well, the man then kind of walked away in another direction. I watched him start to go near another vehicle parked a ways away. At that point, I knew that I could get to my car. I left the Chick-fil-A and just about sprinted for my vehicle. I got inside and then immediately left and drove away. Once I did, I called the police and reported the guy. I'm not sure how the situation was handled, but I never heard anything more. It's kind of crazy looking back that the man was wearing a full Chick-fil-A uniform, but didn't even work there. I'm not sure if he was a disgruntled former employee or just got the uniform online or something, but it seems as though he was just walking around and causing problems. My name is Caroline, and I used to work at a Chick-fil-A when I was in high school. This was several years ago, and I did not mind the job. Mostly, I would work behind the counter and take customers' orders. I worked there for 6 months, till something made me quit. The story gradually happened over time. I'm not sure when exactly it started, but basically there was this one creepy guy that would always come in. The first time I noticed him was when he was ordering and called me by my name. Now, I do have a name tag, but most customers don't do that. I dealt with so many customers on a daily basis, though, that I wouldn't remember most of them. So this guy might have been there before, maybe not. But several days later, probably, the guy came in again and also mentioned my name that time. He complimented me on my appearance both times also. Nothing was that creepy about those experiences, though. But the next time is when I started to get uncomfortable. I remember he came in when we were really busy. When he got to the front of the line, he said that he didn't want to order anything, but just wanted to look at me. I was a little weirded out by this. I just said thanks, not knowing what else to say. He asked me how I was doing and if I had plans after work. I just played it off by saying that I was good and that I was really busy for the rest of the day. It was strange because there were a lot of people there in line behind him. Finally, the man left. Now, after that, he did come in a couple more times and had similar behavior. I was a little creeped out by him at this point, also because of the fact that he was much older than I was. Because keep in mind, I was 17 at the time and this man was at least in his 50s. So, after working one night, I remember that I got off and went to my car in the parking lot. When I did, I noticed a car parked sort of across from me. The man was sitting in the driver's seat of this car and kind of looking in my direction. I quickly looked away and started my car and then left. He didn't seem to follow me or anything, but I found that really strange. I mean, he hadn't gone into the restaurant, and it didn't seem like he was going to either. I wondered if he was just trying to watch me or something. After that encounter, I probably didn't see him for a week or two. The next time, though, it was even worse. I remember that I had worked another night shift. Being a high school student, I was a part-time worker and often worked after school until like 9 or 10 at night. So after getting off of work, I drove home to my parents' house where I lived. When I got onto our street, I noticed a car parked in front of our house. This was unusual. After getting into the driveway, I looked over at the car. I didn't have a good view, but it looked like that same guy was in the driver's seat. Now this really creeped me out. I got out of my car to go inside. As soon as I did, the car that the man was in drove away. I went inside after that, and he did not return. The next time that I worked, though, I told several of my coworkers about him. They all seemed concerned, and said that they would keep an eye out for the man in case he came in. Well, for probably at least another week after that, I did not see the guy. Then, I was working one Saturday morning into the afternoon. I think I got off at like 6 p.m. My parents and siblings had all gone to something earlier in the day. Unfortunately, I couldn't go because I was working. So when I got home from work that night, I would be all by myself for several hours. I remember that probably at like 8 p.m. it was dark out and I was in the living room. Then there was a knock at the front door. From where I was, I could not see the door, so I got up to look. I checked out the front living room window and saw the same guy standing at the front door. I was extremely creeped out by this, and I stayed where I was. The man knocked on the door again, but I didn't move. Then he started walking around to the back of the house. As soon as he did that, I called the police. Then I ran to my bedroom and locked myself in the closet. When I was hiding in there, I did not hear any more noises. After what felt like a long time, the police arrived. To my surprise, the man was still there. The police found him in the backyard, and I was really happy that they had caught him. I ended up having to get a restraining order against the guy. I also quit my job at Chick-fil-A. The man got banned from our location, but I still didn't want to work there, and decided to just focus on school. I still think back to that crazy experience all the time. This happened 3 years ago. It was a nice summer night, and I went to Chick-fil-A with a good friend. When we got there, it was a little bit later, so not as many other customers were around. We went inside and ordered food, but then went outside to eat on the little patio that they had at the Chick-fil-A. There were a number of tables set up outside, and it was such a nice evening that we both went out there. The Chick-fil-A was located in the same type of area that most of them are. It was located off a road with many other businesses, such as stores and restaurants. But this Chick-fil-A was basically on the very end of the shopping area, because after the patio where we sat was a parking lot, then there was this little wall of pavers about 5 or 6 feet high, and above it was a pretty dense woods. That was basically the end of the commercial area and led to more wild and residential properties. So anyways, we were both sitting there eating and talking to each other. Neither of us were facing the woods, but it would have been to my left and to my friend's right. I remember though, looking over and noticing something in the woods. It was dark, so I couldn't really tell, but as I kept watching, I soon realized that there was a man there. Some guy was standing mostly behind a tree, above the paver wall in the woods, and he was looking right at us. This was bizarre to say the least. My friend and I talked about it briefly and wondered who the guy was and what he was doing. Soon enough though, we looked back and he was gone. We continued our conversation, but several minutes later we noticed the man again. He returned to the same position that he was in before. This was maybe 5 minutes after we had first seen him, but once more he left and was only there for like 30 seconds. For the next 10 minutes, neither of us noticed him. Then he was back again for a third time. This time, he stayed there longer. He watched us from the woods for well over a minute, maybe 2 or 3. We both thought that this was pretty weird. Once more though, he eventually moved away and went back into the woods. For the rest of the time that we were sitting there and eating, he was not visible. Eventually, we got up to leave. My friend and I walked to our cars in the parking lot, said bye to each other, and then got into our vehicles. After getting into my car, my friend drove off, and I checked a few things on my phone. Now, I was not parked that particularly close to the woods, but I could see it decently. I remember that after being in my car for about a minute, I looked up and saw the guy in the woods again. This time, he emerged from the woods and jumped down from the wall of pavers. Then he actually started running over to my car. I scrambled to put the car into drive. After the man reached my car though, he tried opening up the passenger side door. Just moments later, I was able to drive off and leave the scene. After making it safely out of the parking lot, the man did not chase after me. Still, I called the police and I let them know about what had happened. It was just too bizarre. After it happened, I did not go back to that Chick-fil-A for a while. I'm still not sure who exactly that guy was and what he was doing in the woods. This is something that happened back when I was a kid. I was 7 years old and went to Chick-fil-A one time with my parents and younger sister. Now, this Chick-fil-A, I remember, had a play place in the back of it. We sat down at a random booth in the restaurant because it was very busy. I remember that after a while, I asked my parents if I could go to the play place. They said yes and remained with my little sister in the booth. When I got inside of the play place, I noticed that nobody else was in there at all. I didn't mind. In fact, I preferred it this way. I started climbing on the obstacles, and it wasn't as good as some of the McDonald's play places that I had been to, but it was still pretty decent. After being there for probably 20 minutes if I had to guess, I was still by myself. I may have lost track of time a little bit, but I really don't remember. The next thing I knew, a man entered the play place area. I just know that he called out to me and said that I needed to go. I was confused at first because I didn't know this guy. He also was not a Chick-fil-A employee, but just some random man. He then told me that my parents had left, and I had to go now before they drove away. This got my attention. For some reason, I believed the guy. I thought that my parents might actually be leaving, and I was afraid to be left there. So I instantly got down from where I was and walked over to the guy. Now, there was actually an exit door in the play place area, but I'm guessing it was rarely used. The guy opened the door and grabbed my wrist and led me outside. We started walking around the building through the parking lot. We were going very fast, and I remember that the man started walking over to the parking lot next door, which was another business. I don't remember exactly what it was. As we were quickly walking to the parking lot of the other business, I looked into the Chick-fil-A parking lot. That's when I noticed my parents' car was still there. and it also appeared to be empty. That would mean that they had not left Chick-fil-A after all. When I saw this, I kind of slowed down. I remember the man tugging on my arm to move faster. He said that we had to hurry. I didn't move faster though. At that point, I remember that I stopped completely. I wanted to get away from the man and run back to the Chick-fil-A, but I couldn't. I started trying to move my arm away, but the man's grip was strong around my wrist. I was also wearing my winter jacket, and when I was trying to move my hand away, it sort of worked. I got my wrist free of him, but the man was still grabbing onto the end of my coat sleeve. So at that point, I quickly moved my arm back, causing the sleeve to come off. The man tried pulling it, but this basically just made my jacket fall off entirely. I then tugged away and was finally able to break free from the man. Then I ran as fast as I could away from him. He did not chase after me. I got back inside Chick-fil-A and ran to my parents. I told them about the guy, and the police were called. I don't remember much else after that. Obviously, I'm very grateful that I got away. I feel dumb for not questioning the man immediately, but I was very young. Hopefully, the man was caught. This is something that happened back when I used to work at a Chick-fil-A. I would say it was about 5 years ago now. I worked there for only a few months. The job was pretty good, and my coworkers were very nice. One time, I was working a closing shift. I remember that with a few hours left, things had finally started to quiet down. I went out and was told to sweep around the restaurant. I would help to clean tables around the dining room as well. We were constantly making sure that the restaurant was in good order for the customers. So I went around and only a few people were scattered around the restaurant here and there eating. Maybe a total of like 4 people were sitting down. I remember going towards the very back corner, and there was this man sitting in a booth. He looked kind of mysterious because his head was down, but he wasn't sleeping. He was also wearing all black and had a hood covering most of his face. I didn't really think too much about it though. After sweeping the floors, I went to go do something else. Sometime later, I went back to clean some of the tables, so I was in that same general area. I noticed that every single person was gone now, except for the man. He was still in the same place. So I cleaned and then went back. The next time that I returned to the dining room area was when we closed at 10 p.m. I went out into that area and noticed that the man was still there. He would have to leave now. I walked up to him and told him that we were closing. The man did not respond to me or even acknowledge me. I spoke louder and once again said that we were closed and added that he would have to leave now. After a few seconds of silence, I was getting nervous. Then the man turned and said no to me very loudly. I didn't know what to do. I just said, "But we're closed." The man then stood up and just looked at me. He was a large man and much taller than I was. I just walked back over to the counter to tell a coworker. I found my coworker Brian and let him know about the situation. Then we both walked back over to the man. He was sitting down at the table again the same way that he had been for hours. After approaching, we both told him once more that he had to leave. The man ignored us at first. Brian then threatened to call the police on him. The man then stood up and looked right at Brian. Then he loudly said, "Go ahead, skinny boy." I specifically remember him calling Brian a skinny boy. Brian asked the guy what his problem was. The man's response was to walk over and take the little flower decoration that we had at the table. We had flowers in small vases at many of the tables or booths. After picking it up, the man then slammed the vase down on the floor, breaking it. Brian told me to follow him, and we both quickly went to the other side of the restaurant. We knew at this point that the man was dangerous. I remember the guy yelled something at us as we were moving away. We found the 2 other coworkers that were in the back and told them what was happening. We all then decided to leave the restaurant for our own safety. Then we called the police. We went to our vehicles and waited, and the man remained inside of the restaurant. The police got there very quickly and went inside. We couldn't tell what was going on, but about 20 minutes later, they came out of the restaurant with the man. Apparently, he did not respond to officers' orders. He tried tackling a police officer after he was approached, and it took 3 officers to bring him down. Eventually, though, he was apprehended and taken away. We went back inside and finished up our closing duties. The restaurant was not really damaged or anything from the man's rampage, just a few things scattered around. That certainly made for my scariest experience working at Chick-fil-A, though.